Ducati just had their worst MotoGP result in years. No podium for first time since Silverstone in 2021. Marc Marquez out, Alex Marquez crashed, and suddenly the most dominant bike in MotoGP looked vulnerable. So what actually happened? Was this just chaos in one race? Or the first real crack in Ducati's dominance? This is Full Lean The Angle. Hey Don, how you going?
You put on your movie voice again, my friend. I like it.
You like the movie voice?
I like the
movie. Hey dude, how you been? You all right?
Yeah, we're having fun. It's just been pouring with... I haven't ridden any motorcycles really this week. It's been pouring with bloody rain. So that hasn't been fun. But okay, but at least now we're sitting indoors. We're talking about MotoGP. There's no MotoGP this weekend, but it's coming soon. We don't have to wait 3 months.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting. I mean, we are at... The best thing for MotoGP fans, I mean real MotoGP fans, is we've got a race coming up, and to date we have no idea who's going to win. So we have no idea what's going to happen in the next race, and that's the most exciting thing for a MotoGP fan. It's fantastic. I can't wait. Yes!
Tell me about it, Don. Tell me about it. Hey dude, Ducati they've had 88 race podiums, and unfortunately that streak has come to an end. So on the surface that sounds quite dramatic, but when you break down the race weekend, there was a lot of factors involved. What was your first reaction when you saw the streak finally stop? When we look at the race itself, Marc was actually chasing in third place, and then he obviously hit that curb as we discussed last week, and he had a tie blowout. And if that hadn't happened, Ducati would still have had it. And I think Marc was close to 100 streak there to win. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, he is something close to that. It's chasing the Rossi all-time record. Well, I think it's Agostini, I can't remember. And they've kind of changed it now because now the lower classes don't count anymore, so it's all gotten a bit jumbled. But yeah, you're right. It's strange. I mean, Ducati last year was not... I mean, from honestly the year before, 2024, do you remember? It was called the Ducati Cup. I mean, you had to look quite a long way down the order before you came across a non-Ducati. It was normally Brad Binder as KTM. And he was seventh, if that. And you had to be on a Ducati to win. I mean, I remember, where was it? It was Motegi 2024. And I remember at the beginning, there were 1 or 2 KTMs up there, and then they just all slowly started going backwards. And then it was all Ducati Cup. And it looked a bit like a Formula One race. I mean, I haven't watched the Formula One in fact, it was early in Australia. We're recording this on the Sundays. The Formula One race was this morning. I haven't actually watched it. But previously, it was always you'd have McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and the cars were always clumped together. Because there was the cars that mattered more than the drivers, that's the way it worked. And it was starting to look like that. You would have like 6 Ducatis, 2 KTMs, 2... Aprilias, and then 2 Hondas and 2 Yamaha, whatever, you know what I mean? It started looking like that. And the great thing now is that it's starting to look a bit less like that. I'm not quite sure what's quite kicked that off. I mean, now we're seeing on the podium, not this race, but it would look good to have a Aprilia, a KTM, and a Ducati on the podium, which is something new and it's something great. And I didn't think this was going to happen until next year, but it has started changing a bit, which very, very good news for us fans.
Well, let's have a quick breakdown of a race. Aldeguer wasn't on the grid because he was injured. Alex had a big-ass crash, and then Marc obviously lost a tyre. How much did those individual events actually shape the outcome for Ducati?
Yeah, okay, I know. I mean, however, look at last year. And this is where it gets very interesting. I mean, I've got the lap chart sort of going up in front of me now here. If you remember last year, it was Marc Marquez, Alex Marquez. And that was the race. It was the two of them gunning for each other and Marc Marquez eventually getting away. But it was a 2-horse race. This year, we had Marc Marquez battling for a podium. And battling, I mean... Acosta looked stronger. He did. On the KTM, just looked stronger. You had Alex started in 7th, went back to 8th place, and he was sitting in 8th right up until he fell off on lap. I'm looking here. Lap 22. He eventually fell off. Mm-hmm. So, from a strong second place to 8th, you know what I mean? It's something's not quite clicking there. And what's interesting, as I was looking up, and I'm going to find it here. Sorry, I'm switching between.
That's all right.
And this has now disappeared. I was looking at the race times of last year compared to this year. And remember, things changed. I don't know whether it was a bit hotter, maybe there was a bit of wind blowing or whatever. But Bezzecchi was something like a second or 2 seconds a lap faster than Marquez was last year. Marc Marquez winning. And that's interesting. That's very interesting because think about this. That means Marc Marquez was slower. I mean, he was many seconds behind Bezzecchi, when his tire went. He was many, and Bezzecchi slowed down at the end of the race. Bezzecchi was celebrating and standing up. He lost a bunch of seconds in the last lap. So Bezzecchi was a lot faster than Marc Marquez this year, and he was only about 2 seconds a lap faster. So Marc Marquez was slower than last year. And and again, weather conditions, it was very hot. I know the tires were having a hard time. I don't know if you guys had a look at, somebody posted a photo somewhere of Bagnaia's tire. And it just looked buggered. I mean, the tire, in fact, not even the sides. Normally it's down the sides that start shredding. This was down the center. And I know Jack Miller said that also. He couldn't go more than quarter throttle. Because remember, this is a track that has a high acceleration. It's got 3 corners where you go to a near stop and then accelerate hard in low gears. And the tire spins. Those MotoGP tires, especially the Michelins, spin in a straight line. And it was like a road tire. It was wearing down the center of the tire. So I don't know if that played a role in it. Maybe just this year was far more abrasive, and therefore the whole race was slow, which means Bezzecchi being faster than last year is just a huge improvement. But, we can read something into the fact that Marc Marquez was slower than last year.
Well, the thing is, Ducati used to, just before last year, they had 8 bikes on the grid. They had 2 with Pramac, 2 with VR, 2 with Grassini, and obviously the 2 factory bikes. That was 8 bikes. Then obviously Pramac moved away to Yamaha, and that development depth isn't there. The amount of data that we're getting back just isn't there. Do you think that Ducati is starting to rely on a few superstar riders now a lot more, trying to lean on them instead of having the data, and this is the result of that?
So it gets it gets a bit it gets interesting. It also gets a little bit you say certain things, and certain fans of a certain man on the grid get very upset when you say stuff like this. But there's 2 theories. You're right, maybe, or 3. Let me say this. There are 3 possible theories to Ducati's decline. There is the fact that they have less data, but remember they've still got 4 current factory bikes on the grid, which is the same as, which means they've only lost 2 satellite bikes, so previous year's bikes. So I don't know how much data they're kind of losing there. Remember, instead of having 4 previous year's bikes on the grid, they've only got 2 now, and they've got 4 factory bikes still. So that data is still fine. The other theory that might happen, and I remember there was one of the riders, I think it might have been Melandri or somebody, said that when Marc Marquez joined the team, he's a very adaptable rider. He's got a riding style where he can run very, very hard on the front end, deep into the corner, and with a lot of feel on the front. And it's the kind of style that makes him very adaptable to different sort of various conditions. Whereas Pecco Bagnaia is not. He's got a very different kind of style, and he needs everything to sort of be perfect. It's possible that they tested for the 2025 bike, beginning of last year. They tested a whole lot of different components, tried a whole lot of different things. It's possible that Marquez said he wants to ride this bike, and it's a bike he knew he could ride well on and set decent lap times on, but he knew it wouldn't suit his teammate. His biggest opposition for 2025 was his teammate Bagnaia. And it's a form of self-sabotage. I know we saw Mick Doohan did that once, where they had the V4 500s. They had a Screamer 500. In other words, all the cylinders fire in a sort of uniform manner, and the Big Bang. So 2 cylinders fire at the same time or nearly the same time. Crivellet was much quicker on the Big Bang. Doohan was also quick on it, but Doohan could ride the Screamer better than Crivellet can, and he could set decent enough lap times on the Screamer to beat the other bikes. So he said Screamer. purely because Crivellet was his biggest opposition. So he sort of sabotaged his teammate by insisting that they chose a bike that he could not ride. And that might have corrupted Ducati's development, because now suddenly they've got this motorbike. And I know Gigi and Antonio last year, who was also on a factory bike, he complained about the same thing as Pecco Bagnaia. He had the same problems with the front end that Pecco Bagnaia had, but he was able to work around them better than Bagnaia was. So clearly this bike had a front end problem that it wasn't troubling Marc Marquez, but it was troubling the other riders. So that's another theory. And Marquez supporters get very upset when you say that. No, the bike was just rubbish. Marquez wouldn't do that. This is a guy who would sit behind other riders on qualifying, refusing to let go. That kind of rider definitely wouldn't sabotage his biggest opposition. But as I say, Mick Doohan did it also. It was something, whether you could talk about the ethics of it or not, I don't know. But yeah, it was something that has happened before, and it is a possibility. The other one is quite simply, and okay, I'll just add to that. Now you've suddenly got 2026. You've got all the riders except Marc Marquez complaining about the current factory bike. And, that's a bit of a problem. Now they're having to take a bike that didn't really work, and now they're having to try work around to improve this bike, keep Marc Marquez happy, and keep everybody else happy. And that's a very difficult kind of line to follow. So perhaps their development has just been a little bit corrupted in that way. The other one is quite simply the likes of Aprilia, especially Aprilia, and to some extent KTM, have just developed better. You've got Aprilia seems to be trying a whole lot of new fancy things. They got those arm era things. They got all of that, and they're just getting ahead. It's quite frankly, they're just Ducatis. Maybe it's a little bit of complacency. We're the best bike in the world. We're the greatest. We got the greatest rider. We'll be fine. And a bit of complacency means that just Aprilia is getting ahead of the game. It's so all of these things are possible. Unfortunately, Ducati does not put a press release out saying, anyway, so here the troubles are all lined out for you. They don't do that. They get very cagey, and even now and then they will go so far as to actually tell little fibs, as it were. Just trying to put everybody off the set. That has happened before. So it's very difficult because you don't quite know what information to trust. Remember, beginning of last year, they said that the 2025 Ducati has a slightly different front end and slightly different aero. And apart from that, it's exactly the same as 2024. And then later in the year, when they had a discussion about Pecco Bagnaia's troubles, suddenly Gigi Dall'Igna says, well, it's the new ride height device. So we're going, wait, what ride height device? You said it was just the front end. Well, it's the ride height device. So
there's always something.
This is all speculation. It could be any of those three. It could be a combination of those three. It's difficult to say. But one thing I will say about Ducati is if you look at the likes of, Alex Marquez didn't do so well in this race, but Digi did. Digi and Antonio. He was quite close up there. And Bagnaia is closer than he was in previous. He didn't have the greatest race, but he was closer than he was in previous races. It does look like Ducati has succeeded in sort of closing up their own riders, building a bike more comforting for all of the riders. It's just not at Thailand anyway a race-winning package.
Do you think the current Tyre? I mean, I did ask a question last week, but do you think that the current Tyre behaviour is favouring Bagnaia a little bit better now?
For Thailand, Michelin uses a slightly different carcass. It's a tougher carcass for tracks that are a little bit more demanding, and they tend to spin a lot more. So bikes that have a bit of a traction problem tend to struggle on that tyre. I know Binder and the KTMs used to struggle on it a lot. Saying that, though, I don't know how much that affects Ducati, because they're normally pretty good on this tyre, and their bike usually handles the spinning very well. It's one of the great parts about the Ducati. It's one of their big strengths, was their ability to deal with the spin and to drive out of corners when most of the other manufacturers couldn't. So that's quite something.
Historically, Gigi Dall'Igna, since he's taken over the program, Ducati's been really good. How much of that success is down to the way the team operates under Gigi Dall'Igna versus rider talent per se?
Well, up until this point, Ducati has been the bike to be on. You had to be on a Ducati to win. And that started first with I keep wanting to say Gigi and Antonio. Dall'Igna. It started with Dall'Igna. He and Dovizioso, if you remember correctly, and Ducati was in dire straits. They came from the Rossi years, where Ducati was just in a complete muddle. And one of the biggest things at the time, I remember during those years, if you remember when Rossi was riding, this is 2011, 2012, so 14 years ago, they were struggling to figure out what was wrong with this motorcycle, because it just would not carry corner speed. It didn't have the front end feel. It just wanted to run wide everywhere. And eventually when Dall'Igna came in, and you remember that during that time, they changed everything. They changed the entire chassis on that motorcycle over and over again. They got outsourced different people to come try, consult on it, all sorts of things. And then eventually they got Dall'Igna in, and the first thing he said is, how long is that motor? Like literally the motor itself, the size of the motor was stupidly long. So the first thing it is, they built this much more compact motor. And I remember Dovizioso went out on it on the first time he went out. He said it was at a test, and whatever test it was. And they went out, he turned into the first corner, and he said he nearly hit the grass on the inside. The bike turned so quickly. So definitely Dall'Igna has a sort of a say in it. But one of the other things that he did is he created a better communication between the engineers at the factory and the team working at the track. And I remember one of the things he actually said was that the engineers need to come and spend time at the track, because there was this problem whereby the team would complain about something, and then the factory would say, well, according to our data, no, our calculations, that's not the problem. And he wanted them to come and sit at the track with the technicians at the track and the rider, and try and tell them that there's no problem. You know what I mean? And the engineers had to sit there and go, but this bloody thing won't turn. Yeah, well, according to our data, well, come show me how it turns. And that's one of the things he did. So he definitely did create a different kind of atmosphere. He also got extremely creative. So he was the first one who started the modern aerodynamic sort of phase, as they call it now, the aerodynamic era, with wings and all that. I remember when he first put wings on those motorcycles, the guy at the time was the guy running the Honda team, or the Honda MotoGP project. I remember him even actually saying that nope, he actually dismissed it. He said, nope, it won't work. Honda has tried it. They've tried all these aerodynamic things. It doesn't work. He said one of the problems is that it's too difficult for the riders to ride. It becomes extremely heavy. The riders can't turn. We've tried it. It doesn't work. How wrong he was.
How wrong he was.
Yeah, you look at the bikes now. I remember Honda very sort of grudgingly putting wings on their bikes, and I'm just sort of imagining how much that must have hurt them, to kind of do that.
There you go.
So no, Dall'Igna, he did many things. He managed to solve problems. I mean, he's the one who recognized the engine problem when everybody else kept changing chassis. He created a completely different team dynamic, team factory dynamic, whole process, and he put a lot more innovation into it. So he is a big role. It's just that I fear a lot of the other teams have started doing kind of similar, or something. I don't know. But already, I think this year their big goal was to make their bike easier to. I suspect their big goal was to make the bike easier to ride for everybody, not just one rider, which they have done. But I don't know if that was at the expense of their overall performance.
The thing is with the likes of Dall'Igna and these guys coming in, I was talking to Sloan Frost, and he was saying how much they can dial for every corner. They can dial in engine braking, traction control at the angle where you want it, how you want it, everything. And like he says, it is not just about the racer anymore. The whole team behind you, the suspension guy works with the engine guy works with telemetry and on all these things. There's a lot of data. It's like running a spaceship. It's a whole team effort, and everybody works together. And one of those cocks don't click, the bike just doesn't go. With Ducati, obviously all the teams are developing in the background. Do you think that maybe they use Thailand as a testing ground, going, well, we know we will dominate once we get to Europe? So maybe they were just developing their bike maybe for next year, or just trying out a bunch of different things out in Thailand, and said, well, it's fine. It's beginning of a year, and we'll sort it out once we get to Europe.
Okay, for just going back to what you originally said about different, the teams working on different things. Here's a little thing is why I've always been very kind of against all these extra gadgets. They're very exciting. You got the wings, you got the ride-out devices, the electronics, all these different variables coming in, and they're for engineers, they're very exciting. The problem is every time you put a gadget on a motorcycle, you detract some of the responsibility from the rider. Because, think about it like this. You've got two motorcycles that are exactly the same rider, same bike, and they set identical lap times. Now on each bike you add, let's just say, wings, aerodynamics, ride-out device, and electronics, for example. But each of those are done by different teams for each of the two bikes. These are two identical bikes, identical riders set the same. And on bike A, each one of those factors is 0.1 of a second faster. Well, let's go even better, 0.2 of a second. So wings, the aerodynamics that they put on bike A are 2.2 of a second faster than that on bike B. Electronics, 0.2 of a second faster than bike B. Ride-out device, 0.2 then on bike A, then bike B. Now suddenly you go from two identical motorcycles to one that's 0.6 of a second a lap faster.
Yeah.
And remember that now this rider on bike B has to somehow pull out 0.6 of a second a lap. And this is from being on identical. So again, the more gadgets, the more complicated the motorcycles, the more the more the weight is given to the electronic, to the engineers, to the technical team than the riders themselves. And then you end up with a bit of the Formula One kind of scenario where it's more about the machine than anything, which is why I think 2027 is very exciting. They're getting rid of quite a bit of that. Although this year, as we see now at Thailand, it's been quite a jumbled one. Saying that, getting back to your original question about Thailand is different. It's a strange track. It's sort of a Jekyll and Hyde. You've got the last corner going onto the pit straight, turn one, and then there's a little kink down the straight there, which they call turn two, but it's stupid because honestly, it's a little kink. I mean, you don't even notice it. It's like the person tarring the track going from turn one to the bottom there was a little bit drunk and he put like a slide. I mean, the riders don't even know, but that's turn two. So the bottom corner where they actually brake, that's turn three. So going up to turn four. Those are all extremely tight corners leading on to decent sized straights. And they test the bike very differently. You have to brake really hard, come to a near standstill in what I think probably first gear. And you have to accelerate 300 horsepower like hell out of those corners. And that happens in 3 different occasions. And it's tough. That's where the machine needs to work. You need a lot of traction. You need a lot of stability. And if you don't have that, you can be the best rider in the world and it makes no difference. That's where the machine works. Then you've got the second half of the track, which is all a lot more sort of flowy. And you'll notice the difference between Marquez and Pedro Acosta. Through the flowy sections, Acosta was better. Much better. He had a lot more front end. You needed front end agility. You need to be able to carry corner speed. And he had that better than Marquez. Where Marquez had the advantage on the Ducati is he could pull out of those tight corners better than Acosta could. You saw a few times Acosta was able to get on the inside of Marquez, get a reasonably good drive, and Marquez would just drive past him again, going up to the next corner. And so that is the difference. And Ducati's always been very, very good at that. It's been a strong point, the ability to drive out of tight corners. And the way the tracks work these days, there are a lot more tight corners going onto straights than there used to be. And with so much horsepower, I mean, they make 300 horsepower at full power, full throttle, full everything. It's actually unworldly. And the thing is, so Thailand is, most of the other circuits are not like that. They're a bit different. There's similarities, but not really like that. It's very, very hot also, very, very hard on the rear tire. When you get to Europe, places like Jerez, it's a cooler temperature. There's not so many high speeds, and it's a lot more flowing circuits. You look at Le Mans, you look at Mugello, Catalunya, Sachsenring, Aragon, Misano, they're all a lot more flowy. So that's going to make a difference. What the problem I see though is that Acosta was better than Marquez on the flowy, more European section of the Thai circuit, whereas Marquez was better at the tight stop and go corners. How that's going to, so according to my logic, he should go worse if we look at it from this way. Going to the more flowing European tracks, Acosta should be stronger than Marquez. However, we don't know how the bikes were set up. Maybe Marquez's bike was set up with preference to the stop-go corners at the I'm losing my words here. At the downfall of the sort of more flowing circuits, more flowing corners. And maybe if he'd set it up differently, when he gets to the European tracks, they set it up a little bit differently. I don't know. We'll have to see when we get there. But the European tracks are where the big points come from. So that's going to be different. But right now, I think Acosta and Aprilia, you watched in the sprint race when Marquez and Bezzecchi were together, when they went through those flowing corners, Bezzecchi could just hold a much tighter line. He could carry more good corner speed and was able to point the bike up straight much easier than Marquez was. So, and that's more the European sort of tracks. So I don't know if they go to Europe if it'll be any better.
Well, who knows? Maybe Aprilia has actually caught up and KTM has done their homework and they're in the play this year. That would make for really amazing and exciting racing. I sure did enjoy Thailand. Talking about KTM there, the two factory bikes did reasonably well. However, as you pointed out last week, Maverick was nowhere to be seen. What do you think happened to the Tech3 bikes?
Bastianini, I don't think quite has it anymore. He's a rider who's very good at the end of a race, and we saw this one. He did catch up quite a bit, and he sucks at the beginning. And just even last year, he didn't seem to quite have it anymore. I don't know if he's just, it sometimes happens to riders. They just lose. Vinales is a finicky rider. And by finicky, I mean he needs things to be quite perfect. He needs things to be, So you see, while we're talking about the KTMs this and the KTMs that, it is actually Acosta. And Gian Antonio was a second. So he ended up being the first Ducati, but he was a second ahead of Binder. And Gian Antonio said he had problems with his bike. For the first 6 laps, he was up with the podium pack. He was behind Marquez. It was looking like it was going to be interesting. And then he said he had a problem. He would not specify what it was, but he said it made the bike very, very difficult to ride. Now, he did seem to specify sort of a technical problem. That can sometimes mean, I cooked my rear tire. It can be code for saying I cooked my rear tire in the first 6 laps and then I struggled after that. So it could be that. But when he says technical problem, it's and I find it interesting that he wouldn't say what it was, and that's him either being extremely diplomatic or or it's maybe a problem he caused. This is the problem. This is the difficulty with trying to kind of figure out what all these are, because you're never quite sure. They use a strange language. Normally, when there's a problem, where or the bike got a bit of a vibration, or the bike had a bit of a splutter, or there was or the engine braking was a problem, or they usually would say something. This time he did not. But I wonder if that's not a Ducati thing, because I notice a lot of the Ducati riders don't really like to specify what they're talking about. It's maybe like the Ducati sat them all down and just said, right, you guys keep quiet.
Yeah, we do know that manufacturers are always developing ahead of the next regulation cycle. Do you think Ducati would already be experimenting with concepts for next season?
I think all the manufacturers are experimenting with concepts for next season. It is something that perhaps we have to add into the development of this year. I'm not entirely sure that they're using this year as a test bed for next year, or except for technology that can be used, that's applicable this year, that can be used next year. What I do think that's happening is that a big portion of the development team back at the factory is now working on new tech that will not necessarily apply now. So tech that, for example, that instead of getting updates this year or more different things, you've got a portion of the engineers, the test riders, all of those are busy working on next year's rules. So maybe that has something to do with it. I mean, maybe just it's possible people like Ducati portioned a whole lot of engineers and test riders and things to working on the 850 rules for next year, and they're not and haven't put that much into this. Maybe, I don't know. I do know that at the shakedown test at Sepang, beginning of February, apparently Mick Kallio was riding an 850 KTM. That's what everyone thought, because he was like 5-6 seconds a lap down on everybody else, and he was riding a bike that didn't have a ride-out device, because as you might know, ride-out devices will be banned from next season, which I'm all good for.
Yeah.
So basically next year they're going from 1000cc to 850cc. They're using fully reused, what's that called? Reusable fuel. What's that stuff called? They make it out of wheat.
Renewable.
Yeah, there we go.
Renewable.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
make it out of wheat or something. I don't know. It's bread petrol or something. And
Yeah.
and they're also going to ban ride height devices plus half the amount of downforce. So it is going. I'm very happy with all of that because, as I said earlier, that's all of. The more you have these different gadgets or these different elements playing into the motorcycle, the more it's up to the bike and the less it's up to the rider. Next year, it should be more up to the rider. But yeah, they had Mika Kallio without. The only thing we know, he was way down on times compared to even the other two KTM test riders, and he was the only one without a ride-out device. So it was suspected that he was busy testing that bike. That does mean, however, that he was not testing the 2026 motorcycle. You know what I mean? They would normally have a Mika Kallio there also circulating and doing some testing. So you see what I mean? There was a portion of KTM's testing went to the 850, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for the others. But then again, I mean, it's the same for everybody. Unless you've got someone like Aprilia who's putting no effort into next year, and then next year they're going to get absolutely slaughtered. This is all... I suppose this is how they have to manage things.
Obviously, from next year onwards, there's also the new data sharing regulation that comes in. So teams are going to be forced to share some of their data. And that should make some of the slower or less fast teams a little bit more competitive.
It's kind of vague, if I'm honest. I don't quite understand how all of it works. But one of the things they did say is they're going to share GPS, the GPS data. And that's kind of interesting because a while ago they actually banned teams from using their own GPSs on the bikes. The only GPS you were allowed to use was the Dorna assigned GPS. The reason for that is very simple, is because once you've got a GPS on the bike, then you can start programming the electronics, not just for every corner, but for every basically millimeter of the circuit. You can program a different mapping, a different everything. You can program the electronics for every little point the entire way around the circuit. You know, every single bit of the track has slightly different grip, slightly different characteristics, slightly different everything. And it just made it a big thing. I mean, you'd end up with these, you know, the huge teams like Ducati, like Honda in those days, the Repsol Honda. They just have whole teams of people, you know, on programming the electronics, whereas the smaller teams just wouldn't stand a chance. So they banned that, and then what the teams had to do is they worked on, there'd be a beam across this, I think usually the start-finish straight and maybe somewhere else, they would reset it. Then the system would work on distance. So it would know where you are based, but they couldn't program the electronics as accurately. Then we got all the standard ECUs. So everybody uses the standard ECUs. They use standard IMUs, and I believe they're moving to more standardized sensors. And this is becoming good because, you know, teams have a workaround everything. They, you know, use a different sensor to trick the ECU into saying certain things. They used to use, other teams would use different IMUs. It's the inertia measurement unit that tells you what the bike is doing. And they'd use that, give different inputs into the ECU that would sort of trick the ECU, and then they get to program it differently. Now they're standardizing pretty much everything. So although the bikes are going to have all electronics like traction control, they're going to have wheelie control, dive control, brake control, all that kind of stuff is going to come in. But it's going to be more standardized, and more so, the other teams are going to see exactly where the bikes are going, what speeds they're going to be running. You can tell what sort of speed a different bike is running. You're going to have a lot more data on the other bikes and on the other teams. And this is very good news, especially for the smaller teams, because you can share more data. The smaller teams can see where the bigger teams are going and what they're doing, and basically can kind of copy. What it won't be is that, for example, I doubt well, definitely not. They're not going to say exactly what the engine is doing, exactly what the suspension is doing, where the braking's at, although you can work that kind of stuff out. So the exact measurements of the running of the bike and the setting of the bike are not going to be available. But what speed the bike is running, what sort of lines they're using into corners, all that kind of data, they're going to be able to see. And it is going to help, it is going to make the racing a lot closer. I mean, especially for the teams that are struggling, like Yamaha, Honda, those sort of people. I can see exactly where they're losing out. Not just at the moment, it's mostly just time. They can see where they're losing time, but they can see exactly which part of which corner they're losing time and where to work exactly. And it's more than just rider feedback. You know, at the moment, it's more the riders kind of go, well, they're faster in the corner than me and they're faster out there than me. and this is going to make it's going to give a lot more data to the other teams and give them a lot better direction on where to go. So it is very exciting.
With this data acquisition, obviously it's going to help the smaller teams quite a bit. Now, in recent years, Jorge did win with Pramac, but from memory, it's not very often that satellite teams actually manage to beat the factory teams.
I'm actually trying to think when the last time was. You know when it might have been. Actually, yeah, it was 2001. Valentino Rossi.
Yeah.
It was an Astro Zero Honda. He was on a satellite team when he beat the Repsol Hondas. I think that's the last time, because after that it was Rossi was all on factory bikes. Nicky Hayden was on a factory bike. And I'm going through. Sorry, we're gonna do a quick run through the teams of the last 20 years. Stoner factory bike, Lorenzo factory bike, and then it was Marquez factory bike. Yeah, it was been factory bikes. Mir, Quattararo. Then it's been Bagnaia since then. And then you're right. It's the last time since. It was Valentino Rossi. And before that, I'm not actually sure. That's a very good point. It's but it's interesting. Yeah, it was Rossi 2001 was the last person before that to not win on a non-factory bike. And I can't actually remember before that. I'm going to have to really go and look if that's even happened. I'm sure it has.
Absolutely, so exciting, Don. Always awesome walking down memory lane and analysing things with you and getting that perspective from you.
Thank you very much. It's good fun. I mean, this is what we kind of live for. You know, between races, you spend time thinking about it, looking at it, scheming, theorizing, possibly getting it completely wrong, and every now and again getting it right. And we really are such MotoGP nerds. It is good fun. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be a MotoGP nerd.
Absolutely, Don. I love it, man. Obviously, the bad predictions we edit out, and the good ones we'll keep repeating and claim fame for those ones. Hey guys, if you like what we're doing, smash that click and subscribe button. We are launching a new segment of a show this week called The Racing Line. First up is going to be 2 times New Zealand champion Sloane Frost, so look out for that dropping. Until next time, keep the rubber side down.